Howdy, folks. Today's episode is all about mastering the light and capturing the face. If you've ever wondered how to light a headshot to perfection or what it takes to create portraits that truly connect, you're in for a treat right after this. Welcome to Camera Shake, the podcast where we talk about all things photography and videography. And we have another special guest on the show today. But before we get into that, let me just ask you for a quick favor. I've noticed, as always, that there are about 65% of you who are listening and watching on YouTube and listening on audio. 65% are not actually subscribed to this channel. So you can change that and help me get even more awesome guests on the show. Is super easy. Just click that subscribe button. It would make a massive difference. Anyway, that being said, without further ado, let's get straight to our special guest today. It is the New York City-based headshot and portrait photographer par excellence, Pete Coco. Pete, man, how's things?
Doing well. Thanks for having me, Kirsten. I'm really happy to be here. I'm excited.
Yes, I'm really excited to talk to you, especially after our slight technical difficulties here at the beginning. Crazy times, but
yep.
We'll get through it and we'll get this show started anyhow. Pete, it's super pleasure to have you on the show. Your work's absolutely phenomenal, and I'll say that for anybody who wants to check it out. We're going to have some visuals flying in throughout the show if you're watching this on YouTube. If you're listening on audio, you can always go down in the description. You see all the links to Pete's work in there. But let me just, as a headshot photographer in New York City, let me just ask you this. What's a typical day like for you?
Well, I wake up about noon. No, I'm kidding. So, I mean, it's to do what we do, every day kind of is different, which is fun. So I actually don't like to start that early, and I like to have my mornings to myself and my family. So I usually will book if I have a client in studio, I'll have that client, I don't like to start any earlier than 10. And, so if I have an in studio, shoot for the day, could be one shoot, could be two shoots, or I'll be on location somewhere. So I'll be in and around mainly Long Island and New York City, anywhere in New York. But the thing that I love about this, one of the many things, is that there isn't a typical day. Every day is different, which is cool. I'm meeting new people every day, new faces, new stories. And I like that because it keeps me from getting bored,
How would you describe your style of headshot or portrait photography?
So the thing that is a little tricky that we kind of touched upon before we went live is that, there's these definitions for headshots versus portraits. And I always joke that the only people who care about the difference of those definitions are photographers. Like my clients they don't care what I call it. They just like a great photo. But for me, just to keep things clear and to delineate things, I do consider headshots head and shoulders, typically simple, clean lighting, simple backdrop. Think like commercial style a la Peter Hurley. I think that's the best definition of a headshot. But then for me, portraiture is a whole nother way of telling the story. So I try and do both with my clients. So in a typical session, if I'm working with an actor, or even if I'm working with a business person, someone who's a CEO or any kind of entrepreneur or any kind of creative for that matter, I like to give them both of those kinds of images because I feel like that sometimes we limit what we can do with clients based on their job description. But again, at the end of the day, the people you work with, they only want great photos. And so I find that a lot of my business clients love the more artistic, for lack of a better word, portraits that I like to create. And those are the most fun to create for me. But I like to do it all, and I'll do it all in one session in 2 hours or less. That's pretty much what I do.
So it's interesting to me, as a headshot and portrait photographer, to look at different styles of headshots, for example, and I see I see sort of fashion movements coming up, and you mentioned the typical Peter Hurley headshot, that very clean look, that very almost like flat lighting most of the time. Do you think is that still something that people want? Because I remember when Peter first sort of introduced that kind of style, it was really all the rage. Is that still something that's very popular nowadays? And if so, is it something that's predominantly requested by let's say corporate clients or actors?
Yeah, I think so. I think that style is the triangle light, for lack of a better term, has become sort of a ubiquitous light, of course, but also it's become very much a kind of standard fare corporate light. So I don't know that for corporate, yes. For actors, I think that it's always good to have at least one or two of those in their portfolio. But I like to mix it up. I want my clients to leave with a gallery that has stuff like that, but then all kinds of different sort of styles and looks and tones, because I feel like the more you give them variety, the better off you are. Plus, as it becomes harder and harder for us in this industry due to AI, and also due to the fact that there are so many people doing, say, triangle light and stuff like that, that it's a lot more common than it was. I feel like we as photographers have to work harder to develop our own style, our own look, and really delineate ourselves from the pack, as it were.
It's an interesting point because I remember, it's not really that long ago. It was only a few years ago when that Peter Hurley style, it really, exploded, and everybody wanted to emulate that and and copy that and do it because it seemed like such a different thing.
Yeah.
And now it's almost like it's become such a standard that I've always wondered whether whether it's better to like really drill down on that, or whether it's whether it's better to find your own personal voice within that industry. When we're talking headshots in particular, portraiture in general, that's a completely different thing, but particularly in the headshot market.
I think they're related, and I think that the skills you learn from learning like Peter's styles of lighting, and I studied with Peter too early on when I started my journey as a photographer. So I learned a lot of those skills from him that he teaches, and then kind of adapted them to my work. But I think that I look at it as having tools in a toolbox, because what I end up doing now a lot of time is I just use light that makes sense for the face in front of me. And the more people that I photograph, the more I can see right away, okay, this kind of lighting is not going to work on this person. I'm going to do something else. So sometimes that is really the best way to approach it. But the more tools you have in your toolbox, the better off you are. The variety is good also because someone like me, I do pretty much a la carte sales on my images. So the more variety I give them, like if I can give them 5 different stellar looks with different lighting and all of that, then this is going to just increase my bottom line too. So it's a win-win for me.
Do you predominantly work with actors or corporates, or a mix of both?
It's a mix of both. I would say it's probably 50-50. But as I grow my business, I am getting more of the individual sessions from actors and artists and creatives. So, but I'm a musician myself, and actually my background is all in music, and all of my formal training is in music. So all of my schooling is as a jazz musician. And so I'm really connected with that community too. So I work with a lot of musicians and a lot of artists, and that's what I love. That's why those are my favorite clients, because I love to create with other creatives. But I'll do a lot of on location corporate shoots too. So it's a pretty fair mix at this point, which is nice.
How do you plan your sessions? Do you do consultation, or do people show up? And how do you plan your lighting setups through, for example?
Yeah, so they book online, and if they book online, they can book without calling me or talking to me at all. So if that happens, then I do a consult call with them. I make sure I connect with them. If they call me, I try to do everything where I can speak to somebody, because I feel like that's obviously a better way to deal with clients that you're working one-on-one with, and people like that extra touch. So it kind of starts with a consult, find out what they need the headshots for. I like to learn about what industry are you in? What are your goal for these headshots? Like a big part of it is figuring out what the client wants to do. You might get someone who is getting an award and they just need a photo where they're going to look great and use it for that. But most of my clients are going to be kind of moving up in the world, and they're either trying to go for a better job, or they're trying to move up in their own job, or they were just promoted in their job and now they're going to be doing a lot of speaking at conferences, or they just wrote a book and they're a corporate person. So being armed with that knowledge helps me to know what kind of looks they're going for when they come here, and I'm able to help guide them when it comes to how they should dress, what kind of lighting, what kind of backgrounds we should use, just the whole aesthetic of the images we create. So that's part of it. And then for an actor, and even for corporate clients, I tell my clients, bring your entire closet with you. Because the thing that people do is, if you tell them, oh, you want to bring a minimum of 3 options, they will bring 3 things and you're not going to like any of them. And that's usually what happens. So I tell them, bring your entire closet. And they're like, I have a lot of stuff. Do you really want me to bring a lot of stuff? Yes. And I tell them, if you bring a bunch of stuff and we only use 4 or 5 items, all you have to do is bring it home with you. It's better than if you don't bring it. We won't have that option, because people don't realize that sometimes you might look good in something in the flesh, but then when you take a picture in that same outfit, it just doesn't translate well, or vice versa. So when they get here with their closet, I welcome them in. I let them get settled. I offer them water, coffee. Do you need to use a restroom? I want them to ease into the session. I don't want to rush it if it's a full session, because people are already generally nervous enough, So they'll come in, then we take a look at some of the clothing, and then what I'll do is I will coordinate the clothes that they bring with the backdrops that I have. So one thing that I love to do is I love to make sure that the skin tone of the person, the hair color, the clothing, the back, all works in some way with the color backdrops that I have when I do my portraits. So if I do headshots, it's typically on a gray, like a medium gray, or sometimes a bright white, like the Hurley kind of thing. But when I do my portrait work, I have a number of different color backdrops, and I like to coordinate those tones. Like the blue right behind me is one of my favorite backdrops. And when you do that, the images take on a very different life, because it's not just, okay, let's just put you in front of this one backdrop that I have. And there's nothing wrong with that if you only have one backdrop. When I started, I only had one backdrop. It was expensive, and I bought a large gray backdrop. And I just put everyone in front of that because that's all I had. And it looked great with them. But the more I do this, the more I realize that coordinating, kind of being your own creative director and artistic director in your sessions makes a big difference in the final results and just the impact that the photos have.
I find that too. I've just recently started experimenting with, just changing up the backdrops a little bit. I've been using the same options for a while, for a good few years. And it's sometimes, I don't know, I just feel like I want to switch things up a little bit, maybe change the lighting, change the modifiers, just change the backdrops around a little bit. And by sheer chance, I did a corporate shoot the other day, and some of the images had to be on a white backdrop. And I've moved away from that super clean white. Because it's like, I always get the sort of sense that the images sort of look more pasted on.
Yes.
And so I like it when there's a little, either a graduation in it, or when it's not 100% white, it's just, slightly off. But in this particular instance, I did the classic, creating a gray backdrop out of a white backdrop just by changing the distance. But for some reason, the tones I got in this particular shot were just absolute killer. And to be honest with you, the background is so clean and even that you'd never think that wasn't a gray backdrop. So that looked very cool. But then when I converted that into black and white, it was just like fine art. It's like, what are these things? Wasn't necessarily intended. Well, I should say, I know it was totally intended. It wasn't. It was like one of these lucky accidents,
Those lucky accidents are always the best, man. And then like
Yeah,
I've learned so much. I've had so many of those, and then they just become part of what you do. And you're like, oh,
totally.
I didn't realize I made this mistake, but it looks awesome. I'm gonna keep going down this road. It's part of your
Yeah.
work now. I
Oh,
love that.
absolutely. And again, it comes back to something you said in the beginning, where it's like, trying to find your own personality in your
Right.
in the way that you shoot is really super important, because I think nowadays in 2025, if somebody's looking to start doing some headshots, for example, I think one of the first things they probably would do is they would look into the stereotypical Hurley style. It's just one of those things that's so prominent. And but then refining that, I think becomes even more important. Like I really,
Yeah.
on white backdrops, I like to see shadow now. I'm just in that phase. I like to see shadows. I like to see a little bit more three-dimensionality in it. Um, but it's something that's developed over time.
Yeah, I look at it exactly the same way. And I always use the analogy from my music background. So if you want to learn how to play jazz, I'm a bass player. The way that you learn how to play is you find some of the masters whose playing inspires you, and you just learn every note that they've played. And I'm talking, you literally like turn on for me it was CDs when I was learning. You turn on the recording and you listen and you figure it out on your instrument and you write it down and you memorize it until you can play it verbatim with the record. And the thing is, it seems like for people who don't understand sort of how creativity works and how artistic growth works, it sounds like the very last thing you should do is copy someone else or emulate someone else. But what happens is once you have a number of these influences that you're really absorbing, after a time, your own style is going to emerge. But the problem is it's a ton of work to do that. And most people don't want to do the work. Most people want to just kind of get to a proficiency level and then they just stop. And that's fine if that's where some people want to be. However, I have this like insatiable need to become better at whatever I'm doing artistically. And so that way of learning that helped me to become a bass player, I brought with me when I started learning photography. So after I kind of felt like I pretty much knew the triangle lighting and knew how to take a really killer headshot, it kind of just bored me. And then I was like yearning to grow and to do something more. And that's when I had already known another photographer that we mentioned before we went live, Ivan Weiss. And Ivan's work just spoke to me like incredibly strongly. And so it was easy for me to then wind up mentoring with him, which I did quite a bit. And he's become a good friend of mine. And his work is amazing. And so I kind of started mentoring with Ivan, absorbed from him, and then kept mentoring with other people too, like Felix Koons and some others who I've done workshops with, or who I've done like one-on-one mentorships with. And then that combined with just a lot of, I do a lot of test shoots. If I want to learn something and I want to experiment, I'll do test shoots with people. And after a while, you start to just realize your own sort of style emerges. So that's the way that I've done it. And I think artistically, that's kind of the path most of us have to take, unless you're born like a singular genius, which some people are, but that's not the norm, as we know. It's pretty rare.
Hey, let me just jump in real quick to tell you about the amazing sponsor of this episode, Platypod. Platypod offers innovative camera support systems designed to unleash your creativity. With their stable, versatile, and portable solutions, you can capture stunning shots like never before. And I'm not just saying that. As the host of the Camera Shake podcast, I can personally vouch for Platypod's incredible products. They've become an integral part of the show. In fact, I'm surrounded by various Platypod products holding up lights, cameras, microphones, and so on. It's really helped to transform the way I make the show and the way I shoot at home, in the studio, and on location. But don't just take my word for it. Explore Platypod's website at www.platypod.com to discover their range of products, including the Platypod Extreme, Platypod tripod heads, and the brand new handle, of course. Make sure to follow Platypod on Instagram and Facebook at Platypod Tripods for exclusive updates, tips, and giveaways. By choosing Platypod, you're not only investing in your photography, but you're also supporting the Camera Shake Photography Podcast. Thanks again to Platypod, our amazing sponsor. Platypod, where innovation never sleeps.
Yeah, there are a lot of parallels between between learning how to play an instrument or music in general, in photography. And for those of you guys out there, guys and girls listening to this podcast, you know this because I draw these parallels all the time because we have a very similar history when it comes to photography. I started in music as well. I'm a guitarist, so even instrumentally, we're not that far removed. I have two more strings. Potentially, unless you're playing a 5-string bass, who knows?
I've got one of those too.
Cool. So one string.
Not the upright. The upright bass has 4.
Yeah. But you're right. It's one of these things. When you learn how to play a musical instrument, it's a given that in order to get better, you have to put in the work, and it's incremental improvements that over time add up to you being able to play something. And the thing about influence is, you're absolutely right. I preach this all the time. The road to success in anything is just a long and windy road, and you just have to put the work in. And it's I put that down, absolutely put that down to learning an instrument. Well, we're going to get into things like lighting and posing and stuff in a minute. But what was your initial path into photography? How did the switch from music to photography? How did that happen for you?
So I did both really historically from a young age. I started music really when I was like 7. I started playing piano, and then I started bass around 14 or so. And then played, like similar to you, rock bands, did a lot of that. Like rock bands, I played at the local church and stuff like that. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And then the local camera store was looking for someone to work there. So I went in and I applied for this job I think I was 16 maybe. And they never called me back. And so I went in again, and they still didn't hire someone like a week or 2 later. So I went back 4 times until they finally hired me, because I really wanted that job and I was interested in photography and I knew nothing about it. And so like a year later, after working there, the boss loved me. And so I asked the manager, I was like, why didn't he want to hire me after I came in all these times? Why didn't he just hire me? And why did he put me through all that? And she said to me, "Oh, Peter, he just was hoping a pretty girl would come in instead." I was like, "Oh, okay. Can't blame the guy for that." So when I graduated high school, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I went to the local community college. Long story short, there came a point where I had to choose. I loved photography and I loved music, but music at that point won out. And then I went on to study jazz for my undergrad and then my master's degree. And then years later, I actually went back for a doctoral degree in music, in classical music. So I did that part of it too. So I was 100% in. But all during that time, I always had my camera on me. I would take as many photography classes as I could. I shot for the school newspaper. I freelanced, and I worked in the industry all the way through. And so when I started my portrait business, it actually was born out of the pandemic, because my other business, which I still have as well, is a music school. And so I opened that right out of college. And during the pandemic, as you know, everything shut down. And so I saw my business shut down and almost closed completely, because everything was closed and we lost more than half our clients. And like we were just like stumbling along via Zoom. So and I always wanted to do it, and I had done a little bit of portraiture on the side. Like I would do it for friends and colleagues and some of my students. I would take headshots for them, and then I started doing it we started a little theater program at my school, so I would take headshots of those kids. So I kind of had a little bit of experience under my belt. But in 2020, it was really a do or die thing. I just had to do it. And like many people, I know this story is, everyone I talk to, it seems, has like a pandemic rebirth story. So it was born out, right? It was born out of the ashes of that for me. And I just had to, it was like, it couldn't not work. And I really started it from the depths of despair as a last ditch effort to try and make something out of my life and try and pay for my family and just do the things I needed to do. And that was about 5 years ago now, 4.5 or so years ago. And that's where it started. So, and I'm eternally grateful for it because I absolutely love it every day.
Yeah, it's a weird thing. I mean, it's really fascinating how parallel our backgrounds are. Okay, let's talk about lighting a
Okay.
little bit. Do you have a go-to lighting setup, or how do you normally do you start your session with a particular lighting setup? What's your sort of go-to thing to warm a new client up, for example?
So I don't have one that I ever exclusively start with. I kind of just look at the face, and then that'll help me decide where I start when it comes to which kind of lighting. I do, however, have a go-to lighting that I call the hero lighting. And I did not name it that. My friend named it that. But it's basically the light that if you look at most of my portraits that I've done over the past year or so, maybe a little longer than that at this point, has this style of light. And actually, you can see even right behind me, I have a little bit of a streak of light going on my backdrop. So what I do in this lighting is I use a beauty dish for the key light, and then I'll use a background light like this, and I'll put like a streak of light against the backdrop, and I change the tones of that. So sometimes it's a cool white, sometimes it's a warmer yellowish light, so that it looks almost like simulated sun streaking through a window. And then I will add a various amount of fill depending on what I want. But I do like in my portrait work, there's certain things that I do. And again, I think I'm glad that I didn't learn the right way, because a lot of things that I do are probably not conventional, and things that like some photographers they just can't even grasp with it, or they can't cope with it, I should say. It's like one thing I do is I shoot everything at f1.2. Like there's barely a time when I ever stop down my lens when I'm doing my portrait work. I love the more shallow the depth of field, the better. So I'll shoot portraits shallow, and with a 50 millimeter lens is the go-to lens that I use right now. So I'll shoot an entire portrait session with just a 50 millimeter lens. And I love the 50 millimeter lens because I can get close, and then most people don't realize that even if you get close with a 50 millimeter lens, which we consider sort of a standard focal length, it will distort a face. So if you put a 50 millimeter like a less than a foot away from someone, which I do all the time if I want to get like a really close up of their face, it's going to distort. It'll kind of flatten out the sides of the face a little bit, and it could widen the nose. But I love the look for that, and then it's very flattering for people who have, say, a wider kind of face. It's very flattering for different kinds of faces, or if you want to maybe put a little bit of a feeling of uncomfortability into the portrait, because it does distort a little bit. But that's kind of what I do. I'll use mainly 2 or 3 lights. And if I use 2 lights, I'm generally going to go for a smaller key light. So I don't like a big umbrella key light. And I'm talking more for portraiture, not really for like a more corporate style headshot. I'm talking more for like a portrait with a painted backdrop. But I'll go for a smaller key light, like a 22-inch beauty dish. I use the most common thing I use is an Angler 22-inch beauty dish, and I'll use it without any diffusion because I like the little bit of crunchiness, the hardness of it. Or I'll use even a smaller reflector as my key light, and really I'll get it close. So I get the lights really close, and I'm shooting continuous light as well, which is important because that allows me to shoot wide open. And I like the wide aperture combined with the continuous light. And then if I do like kind of the clothing sort of matching and making sense with the backdrop, it's going to look like a painterly portrait right in camera. Like you don't even have to, like people want to go and they want to like do a lot of heavy lifting in the editing room. I rather just have it like 99% done in camera, and then I tweak it just a little bit in post. But that's kind of those are the kind of common lightings I'm doing: a key fill and a background light. And sometimes I'll do the key with a fill without the background light. And the other thing that I like to do that's a big no-no from photographers is I will put my subject literally against the backdrop because I want those shadows that cast of them all over the backdrop. Like that to me is so cool. I love that look. I love having all of those textures. It just adds so much drama and just texture to the image. So I purposely do things that I've been told I'm not supposed to do, but but I don't care. I'm just looking for an image that I think looks cool at the end of the day. So that's pretty much the way that I do it. And then I will move all about the light. So once I set up my light, one thing that I do often as well is I don't plant my feet. Like I see photographers, and I'll use a tripod sometimes as well, but I sometimes see them with their tripod, and there's only one angle and one pose that they can get the whole time because they don't move the tripod. So I'm taking it off the tripod all the time. I'm moving, like if I was taking my picture in this light right now, I'm going to go way to my left, go right in front of me, go way to the right. I'm going to shoot from higher. I'm going to shoot from lower. Because even if you just leave the light where it is, but you move yourself, you're going to get a totally different light out of it. So that's kind of how I do my portrait process in a nutshell, the tornado little nutshell for you.
What's for you? What's the advantage of continuous light over strobes?
Okay, so there's pluses and minuses. The big plus is that you just see what the light does immediately. So you're able to in real time know that the light is going to look beautiful, or that your client is not over or underexposed, or just that they're in the right spot so that the light is giving you, say you want, like, so a lot of times I'll go for like a sort of Rembrandt light on the face or somewhere in that neighborhood, because I feel like that's going to be the most flattering. But I want light in the eyes. I don't want I don't want, raccoon eyes, and I don't want weird shadows on the face. So you can see it all right away. The other advantage is that, as I mentioned, because you're shooting continuous, you can use any shutter speed. So I will shoot at 1.2, which is much harder to do with flash, since you can only use like a synchronization speed of 200 or so. And then if you try to use high speed sync, the flash really doesn't get in there the way you need it to. So I'm able to shoot wide open. And then if I need to use, say, 1,000 shutter speed or whatever, I'm able to do that. I also find that what I'll do is I'll keep the lights at a very low power and close. So one of the misconceptions people have about photography early on, which I know I was so confused by this early on, is that I would think that the closer you put the light to the person's face, the harder it's going to be. However, that is the opposite. It's actually true. The closer the light is to the face, you're going to get a softer light. And if you don't believe me, go outside at 12 p.m. on a sunny day. You have that little tiny light, millions of miles away, and it's very hard, and the shadows are really hard, right? So I like to get the light close, and I put it at a very low power so that it's really just kind of not blowing out the highlights, but giving me the shape that I like. And so that's what I love about continuous. And then what I'll do is I'll build a little, not really a set, but kind of like a little nook out of backdrop. So I might make like a little square in my studio, or a little, like a right angle with my backdrops, where I'll put them sort of in these little spaces and then move around them. So I absolutely love doing that. And I find that those are the big pluses of continuous for me. Another plus for continuous is that what I'll do all the time is, like, the little streak of white light behind me is a bicolor Genere Fresnel light. And I'll use this light for my backdrops a lot. However, if I change the color temperature, so the color temperature now is probably around 5,600. If I put it down to, say, 3,000, that white light is going to be like a really warm yellow light. So I can take my bicolor continuous lights, and it's very easy to just change the temperatures and kind of control the sort of look you want to get. The disadvantages, of course, the biggest disadvantage right now in my studio when it comes to like the nan lights I use and the continuous lights, there's wires everywhere. The wires are just like so annoying because everything's plugged in. The battery options are expensive and they don't really last that long. So once the battery technology is better and you don't have to have wires connected, that'll be a lot of fun for me. And then the other disadvantage is like there's still times you need flash. Like if you're doing when I'm doing corporate events, stuff like that. Like I'm usually going to use flash. Oh, I'm not dragging continuous lights to an on location headshot shoot. You don't know what the room you're in. You don't know how much space you have. And the flash is still much more convenient. And then the flash, of course, is still going to be the most powerful.
I've always shied away from continuous light a little bit because in my little studio space, I don't have a way to completely block out ambient light.
Right. That's important too.
Yeah. So because I have, on one side I have pretty big French doors, and although you can put curtains in front of it, but it never really cancels out all the light. And also my shooting space is connected to another part of the house, and there's windows and stuff. So there's always some ambient light around. Is that absolutely necessary in with continuous light to really cancel out? I mean, I'm guessing if you're shooting at 1.2.
Yeah, exactly. For the way that I shoot, yeah, pretty much I gotta kill the ambient light. So I have like blackout shades in my studio that I just pull down. Excuse me. And then during the daytime, there's still a little bit of contamination from the ambient. But what I'll do is I'll use a V flat to kind of block out the space that I put them in. And I find that usually works pretty well. But I like to get rid of as much of it as possible because then I can really craft the shadows. So the ambient, it's the thing that I don't like about it more than sort of the contamination of the color, like the temperature contamination. Because if I'm shooting at daylight, I don't think it's going to be the most noticeable. And then especially if I grade the photo a little bit, but I find that it kind of takes away a little bit of the dramatic shadows I'm able to get.
Yeah.
And that's the more where I like it. So I'll get the studio as dark as I need to, or if I have them in the light, then I'll take just another continuous light and put it kind of on the other side of the studio or in the lobby just to have some room light, but aim it so that's not really affecting what I'm doing.
Yeah, so that's one of the things that I have to control a lot. My shooting space is relatively small, and all the walls are white, and it's fairly tall. It's a tall ceiling on one side, and it slopes down to relatively low on the other side. So I often use the upper part as almost like a massive reflector. So if I need to lift some shadows, I just take a 7-inch reflector or something one night, and I just fire it into that wall, and the light bounces back, and it just in a very lovely way just lifts the shadows a little bit. So if I find that my shadows are getting a little too dramatic or too extreme, I can just lift it. But I've tried different things with continuous light. Sometimes you're just a slave to the space that you're shooting in, and
you need to know your space for sure, and you have to understand like what works best there. I think that's very important. I was just talking about this today, how you got to learn the room you're in, and so the photographers who are really, really the greatest can walk into any room and see exactly what's going on with the light and really just pull it out and make it work really well on site, on spot. So that takes many, many years of training and of doing it and of shooting in many different spaces. Just like us, when we take our guitar or a bass, right, into any room, it's like you have to reset your sound. You have to start from scratch. Yeah. Some rooms are horrible. Most rooms you play in are going to sound horrible. And so you have to really understand how to get your sound right.
It's in the beginning, in particular, when you first start playing, it's like you take your amp out of your bedroom and you go like, why does it sound? It doesn't sound like it sounds in my bedroom. Well, because this is a different room. It's one of these things. It's a funny story. I did a demo shoot at the photography show on stage, and I was sort of recreating a particular portrait style that I shoot a lot. And when we were setting up, I literally had a measuring tape because I was measuring all the distances between the backdrops and the stool, and the back sorry, I knew exactly what the distance was between the background light and the backdrop and all that kind of stuff. And I remember one of the ladies that helped me set up was like, "Oh, why do you measure everything?" I was like, "Because I need to kind of recreate my space,
Right.
in a weird way." And of course, I'm in a big hall now,
Yeah.
so I need to recreate that. So I need to know what the distances are because that will inform. If I'm trying to recreate that look, I need to be in control of those things. To me, that's quite important. There's an advantage though, learning how to shoot in a small space, I find.
Yeah, and you're going to be in a lot of small spaces, right? Especially if you do a lot of location shooting. And my studio is a decent size. However, I always will make a small space in a part of the studio where I shoot. And then if I want to do multiple lightings, I'll just have maybe like 2 or 3 little nooks about the studio where I bring the client once we finish in one of the little bays. But I find you really don't need more than a 10 by 10 spot to get the lighting in there and to make it look really, really captivating. And again, for me, since my subjects, I like them close to the backdrops. So that saves me a lot of space too, because there's not like an extra 5 feet between them and the backdrop when I'm doing my portraits. They're going to be like a foot away if I have a background light because I don't want it to hit them, or they're going to be literally right up against it.
I'm interested in what you said earlier, where you said you build these little nooks with your backdrops. How do you hang your backdrops to enable you to do that?
So I have those standard kind of I don't know what they're called, but Impact makes them, and you screw them into the wall, and that will hold 3 backdrops on a
Yeah.
roller. So I have some of those for some of my bigger backdrops. So if I have like an 8-foot long backdrop, I have those most of those attached to the wall. But then what I'll do is I'll take and I really have been purchasing mainly 5-foot wide backdrops lately, like this sort of 5x8 size.
Mm-hmm.
Because I find that you don't need more than that for most things if you're a portrait photographer and you're doing like individuals. And what I'll do is I'll put those on a single C stand with a clamp in the middle, and I'll just move them about on the stands and kind of like angle them. And I like to layer them and do all of that. So I don't mind if they're layered. I like it. I like the more visual interest I can give. And I think now that I think about it, I think that's probably why I prefer shooting wide, because I still want, for me, 99% of your attention should be on your subject's face, on their expression, that's like the most important part of your portrait. And so if my background, I should say, is a little bit more cluttered and I shoot stop down, then that's all going to be really crisp and sharp. I don't know that it would have the same effect, but if I'm shooting wide, then your eye is drawn immediately to the eye closest to the film plane, because that's the one that's tack sharp. And then if the backdrop gets a little out of focus, I don't mind that. But yeah, I'll just move them around on C stands, and then I have the different colors I pick just based on what I feel works best for the person when it comes to their skin tones, and as I mentioned, like what they bring with them. So their clothing will help inform that as well.
You mentioned earlier that you adjust your lighting setup based on, for instance, a person's face shape or skin tone.
Yeah.
What would be your sort of go-to strategies for that?
So the face shape, sometimes I find that if you use, for instance, the smaller, harder key light, like you're gonna really cut shadows. You're gonna cut the jawline, the cheekbones, right? So if someone has a really strong features, that I know is going to look good with them. I know it's going to be great with them. However, if their face maybe doesn't have those stronger kind of features, then I want a light that's a little bit less small and hard. So I'll use something a little bit softer, maybe a little bit larger. Sometimes it depends on the age of the person and how many lines they might have on their face. But I mean, when I was early on into this portrait journey, I used to just always light women with that, more like a triangle light. But the more or like people of a certain age with the triangle light, because it fills in, lines and shadows or whatever. But the more that I do it now, and I just really realize that it is just face by face. There's a lot of factors. Sometimes you might get someone who's older that looks really amazing in the harder light because it kind of brings out all of that detail in their face, and it can be very flattering. And so I'll decide in that case. If I have someone also who's really fair, then I don't want to hit them with a lot of light. I want it to be softer and more diffuse. I don't want to blow out the skin tones. And I'll inform the backdrop decisions based on this a little bit too. One thing that people don't realize is that, well, whatever colors you introduce into your portrait will affect the skin tones if you're not careful. So if they're wearing this is why we tell people, well, don't wear a bright red shirt because your skin will look red. So sometimes if I have someone who's a very fair skin tone, I want to put them in front of a warmer backdrop because it'll add a little bit of warmth to them. So those are the kinds of decisions I'm making. If I have someone with a very wide face, then I will shoot close with the 50 and intentionally flatten it out a little bit, right? Because if you shoot them at 135, then their face will look wider and flatter than it actually is. So all of these decisions are things that the more people you photograph, the more faces you see, the more you can kind of make like an internal library that you can inform the next shoot much better than the one before it. And then, when you shoot enough people, you realize that a lot of people have similar kinds of faces, similar kind of shapes of their different features. And then you just start to instinctively know, okay, if I put this person this way, or if I pose them that way, or if I use this kind of a light, it's going to look great with them. And then at the end of the day, I'll also just throw everything at them sometimes. So, because, often you just, like we said at the beginning, you'll find a happy accident can happen where you're not sure if they like it or that they will like it, and they wind up loving it. And we don't see people the way they see themselves. And this is tough for us as photographers, because generally we see them in a better light than they see themselves, right? Because we're always our most vocal critics of our own features, of our own face. And then we see ourselves in mirror image all the time, like when you brush your teeth, when you look at your phone. So when someone takes your photo and you see it on the screen, you're actually seeing your face the way it looks to everyone else, as far as it's reversed. So people can be very critical. However, there's also people out there who, and God bless them, they just love their face. And so it's like they know that they have maybe a strong chin, or, a nose that's not a traditional shape or whatever. And they love that about themselves. So I find that it's really a balancing act of wanting to make people look their best, but also remember that you have this unique face in front of you. And a lot of times it's cool because I'll get people who they just are in love with their face. And it's really, that's the best, because they're open and they're very much going to give you genuine natural expressions. It's much more rare to get that, however, but they're out there too. So I try to keep an open mind, and I try to be very non-judgmental when I take people's pictures, because if I see a feature that I think to myself, well, this feature I want to try and minimize, usually they'll agree with me. I would say 80% of the time, but there's 20% of the time where they're totally cool with the way they look. And so I think that's awesome. We should all be like that.
Absolutely. I always say this, like the standard phrase, that people use when they walk into my studio, like literally every single person the first words they utter is usually, I hate having my photo taken.
Yes.
And it's like, okay, well, we'll have to change your mental attitude. I mean, usually by the time they leave, they've had a very good time, and that's the thing.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about posing and about getting expression. So you mentioned it just now. The best lit portrait, in my view, is worth nothing if the subject doesn't give you something, an expression. Right. It might just be, a particular pose and angle, but it's got to be something in that image that makes that portrait speak, so to say. How do you get your clients to give you what it is that you're looking for?
This is the hardest part, I think, of portraiture, because I'm with you. You can have a portrait that's lit beautifully. All the T's and the T's are crossed, the I's are dotted, but if it doesn't have an expression that says something, then you're missing the main ingredient. So I find that I like to meet people where they're at, and then um, get them to kind of maybe do something that they would normally do. So whether it's a smile for someone who never smiles, or not a smile, something more serious for someone who isn't. But I just like to get to know them as well. So I make sure that I connect with them on some level. And I mean, you got to just be a personable person. And I don't think you need to have a certain kind of personality. However, you do just need to be yourself and connect with people. So I'm just me, and I have a very, you know, unique personality, like we all do. And so I just try to be myself with them. And I find that people will open up to you when they see that you're open to them, and that you're just, there to share the same goals. Now, if it's a corporate headshot person like the one you described, and we just need to get them to smile, or we need to get them to just relax, then I'll joke around with them. I'll be silly. I'll tell them jokes. I'll ask them about their family or about their pets, things like that, to get them to forget that you're staring at them with a camera, because you want to make it so that they forget that they're getting their picture taken. So that's more of the technical way for those kinds of clients. But when I'm working with my actors and my artists, artistic clients, I like a little bit of uneasiness. I like a little bit of emotion. Sometimes I'll talk to them about their lives and things that maybe, I feel like and I'm sure you get this too, Kirsten, is that we're sort of psychiatrists in a way, or psychologists as
Yeah.
photographers. I'll have people come in here, man, and they'll open up to me because I guess they just feel safe here to do it. And I'm a good listener. And so when they open up to you, sometimes they'll tell you things about their lives, or about their family, or about their history. And if you can capture that moment with your camera, um, it's a brilliant thing, and it's something that I think is really separates those who really can do this at the highest level from those who are kind of somewhere in the middle. Um, Often, but that's how I'll approach. If I want, because I like the dramatic expressions too, so I want the more emotional sort of vibes from people in my portrait work. That's just what I like. I have a quick story. I was one of my clients is Ron Carter, the jazz bassist. And if you don't know who Ron is, he's a living jazz legend. He played with Miles Davis, played with everybody. He's on 2,500 records. And I've shot him a number of times now, but I was in the dressing room with him at Jazz at Lincoln Center, just doing some casual portraits. And at one point, I just put my camera down, and I was just chatting with him. And he started opening up a little bit about some of the musicians who he misses, that he played with, weren't with us anymore. And then he just kind of went into a very introspective sort of place. And I just lifted my camera up and took a picture of him in that moment. And I couldn't have done that if I didn't connect with him, because he would have not liked me taking that picture, because he was opening up to me. But I had developed a rapport with him. And also he knew, like, when your client knows that you're on their side, and that you just want the best for them, just like they want for themselves, you'd be amazed how they open up to you. And so when I did that, I was a little unsure if I should do it, but I was like, he's just this expression, I can't let it go. And so I took the photo, and it's one of my favorite portraits that I've ever made. And he does look a little introspective, maybe sad in the photo, but I captured a real moment. And so that's what I want to do. And I want to be at once there for my client, but also not there at all, so that they can express themselves. So it's kind of a dichotomy, I guess. But the best thing I can give to people who want to learn how to get people to be comfortable and to express in front of your camera is just be real with them. just be cool with them. Be and don't have an agenda, I think is really what I'm trying to say. Like, we do have an agenda. We need to get a photo. We want a photo out of them. But if your values line up with theirs, and you want to get the best out of them, and you want to create a moment with them, it's so much easier to get them on the page with you. And developing that rapport with the clients in studio is important too. And don't try and do what other people do, because like I could try and act like Ivan acts when he does his portrait shoots, but I would just be like a poor imitation of his personality. And Ivan has a very particular way he talks, and he's very soothing in the way he talks. I'm not that. I'm in New York. I have this accent that I can't get rid of because I was born with it, and I'm just loud and obnoxious. And so I find that if I'm just me, that it kind of works. And so everyone should just embrace who you are. And the more you're comfortable with yourself, and the more you're confident in who you are, the easier it is for people to open up to you. Because if they come into your studio and you're like nervous and you're fiddling with a camera, like I mean, I'll do workshops, and I'll go to workshops, and like you'll see the newbie photographers, right? And they'll have someone in front of the camera, and they'll just be like, stay right there. Okay, stay there. And then they look down at their camera, and they're looking at their camera like they're looking at the surface of the sun, like their head is going to melt. And then they're fiddling with these settings, and they're fiddling. And then they finally take one picture, and then they look down at the screen, and their eyes widen in terror. And so think about what the person in front of you is thinking now. And it's funny because they'll look at the camera like, oh my goodness. And then the person's like, do I look that bad? And of course it's not the person. It's like their settings are wrong, or the light doesn't look good. So I think the more experienced and comfortable you are with yourself, the more that you know who you are and kind of understand your role in this whole thing, the easier it is for people to be comfortable and have a good time and all of that. Sorry, I'm rambling.
No, it's great. It's fantastic, because the thing is, I always think with photographers in general, you can categorize photographers. You can put them into two different categories. Those who shoot people and those who don't. Often, I think I have friends who are just not the kind of people that like to be around other people a lot of the time. And so they are, naturally predisposed, let's say, to, I don't know, shoot landscapes, or products or something like that, or still lifes, because that's just their thing. That's what they get a kick out of. They might want to be in a really calm environment and just, I don't know, get lost in their thoughts or listen to music and do that thing. I had to do a little bit of that during the pandemic because, just like you guys in New York City, over here in the UK, it was very draconian, and I couldn't shoot conference, I couldn't shoot people. And I did a little bit of product photography, and I hated it. It was terrible. Like, you can't have a conversation with a bar of soap.
Yes,
it's just not happening.
And if you do, then you need some extra kind of help.
Yeah, exactly. Different type of help. But so I think you're quite right. A natural affinity towards other people goes a long way. But it's not to say that you can't learn that, because I think it's also something that you can learn. I find that from a personal experience, I've certainly learned over time to get better at making somebody feel, more comfortable, basically. There's certain strategies that I deploy, which again also often have to do with the space that you're shooting in. Right. And things like, for instance, for a long time, I used to start off with shooting like a 70-200, because it gives you a little bit more distance from the subject, and then eventually 20 minutes in, half an hour in, I would switch to an 85, which brings you a lot closer. And at that point, you would have already built that rapport with the client. You would have gotten to know each other a little bit, and then it would just feel more comfortable to shorten the distance between you and the subject, and they would feel more comfortable. And the Brits are very reserved a lot of the time. It's definitely a British trait that I've noticed since I've lived here. It's Brits are a lot more reserved from the get-go. They don't necessarily, I'm generalizing, by the way. If you're a loud and proud Brit out there, awesome. But a lot of the time, it's really, it's sort of, if you spend the first 20 minutes breaking down those sort of barriers in a little bit, in a way, then that goes a long way for the rest of the session. I've also learned that, those shots that I would take with the 70 to 200, virtually none of them would be keepers. They'll be burner shots, because they're really just there to get the subject to feel comfortable, and the really good stuff would happen later, which incidentally is why I don't do 20-minute headshot sessions, because I can't stand it. And I can't. not here. I mean, corporate things is different, but so once you've got somebody to feel really comfortable, is there sort of a set of poses you go through, or how do you approach the whole pose, especially for somebody who's maybe coming for a headshot and they've maybe never done that before, maybe it's their first headshot, they don't know what to do. How do you get them in the right place?
It depends on the person, because some people, even if they have no experience at all, like I had an acting client. Well, this kid it was his first ever portrait session. He wanted images to use for an acting / modeling portfolio. And the kid just knew how to move. I didn't have to tell him much. I told him very little. And he just was like really natural at it. So some people you work with will just have better natural ways of moving. Actually, I love working with dancers for this reason, because it makes perfect sense. If you're a dancer, you spend your whole life staring at yourself in a mirror, refining all of these movements. So I find that dancers make great subjects for that reason if you do portraits with them, because they know how to move their bodies in really flattering ways. If you have someone who doesn't know how to do that, the main thing that I find that's the biggest challenge is the hands, right? Because the hands never know. It's like they never know what to do with them. And then if you start talking to them about moving their hands in a certain way, they will give you the most strange hands you'll ever imagine. So sometimes I will pose them and I'll tell them, okay, I want you to angle this way or lean this way. Sometimes I'll use a posing table. Like I find if someone's really awkward or not really feeling sure about how to move themselves, if you put a little table in front of them and do a posed table portrait, the table kind of gives them a little like a little safe space. So and then they have something to lean on and makes it easier. But then I'll just start chatting with once I get them in the general area. A lot of times I'll just chat with them a little bit, and then you just, because once they're not thinking about I need to pose for a picture, then they're gonna move around and be like, oh yeah, and so then this happened and that, and then I'll be, all right, freeze, don't move, and they'll be like, what? I'm like, don't move, and then I'll take the picture, because they just find that natural place of where to be. So it's kind of a combination of I will pose them, combined with letting them just find their natural way of being in front of the camera. And because sometimes I find that we photographers will overpose, and then you get those stiff looks out of people. And then experiment. Like, don't be afraid. Like a lot of times I'll try something and I'll take the picture. I'll say, all right, that didn't work. Let's try something else. And so there's no harm in trying. But if I have a go-to pose, it would probably be the sort of, I call it the propaganda pose, because it's like those political poster poses, but I've heard people call it like the NASA pose, which is having the person look slightly up and away from the camera with their head towards the key light. And I just think that makes such a powerful portrait for people. It puts them in a position of power and grandeur, and also looking up and out into the distance. It just gives it that whole essence of they're looking towards a bright future. So I love doing that as a typical pose. And the more I do this, the more I'm trying to embrace things that are not typical. So sometimes I'll have people like really, like, I want you really to to bring, I'll pose them like, I don't want to see your hands necessarily, but I want you to be really sort of uncomfortable. Sometimes I feel like if you give them a sort of uncomfortable way to be with their body, it can just make for a very interesting portrait that tells a story. And again, all of this, I should say, is based on the needs of the client as well as my artistic approach. Because if I have a guy, like I had a guy a couple of weeks ago who is sort of a tech CEO kind of guy, and he does not want to look closed off and uncomfortable. So we don't want that for someone like that. However, if I have an artist or a musician or an actor or someone who's just going for a variety of different sorts of looks and different sorts of emotions, I'll do stuff like that too. And then I have Lindsay Adler's posing book is awesome because you have so much in there that you can glean and you can go back to and use it. So I'll use some of those as a reference guide as well.
That's an interesting thing I did the other day, where I thought, it'd be interesting to have a conversation with the subject and basically just shoot them whilst you're having a conversation.
Yeah.
And I basically thought, well, I want them to not necessarily directly look at the camera. So, I moved away. I probably moved about 2 foot or something, 2 feet away from the camera, and then completely relied at eye detection for this one. And I have to say, I was stunned. There was not one shot in that was out of focus. It was unbelievable. But the advantage was that you get a lot of these in-between poses. When somebody's just talking, having a conversation, and they're literally looking over there to where you are, you get a lot of these poses that are completely, that you just couldn't pose. You just couldn't, put somebody willingly into that position because they're just mid-flow or mid-speak, basically.
Right.
And the hero shot out of that it's just really a phenomenal shot, which is kind of a little bit, the eyes are slightly off camera. There's just, you can tell that there was something moving. You can actually tell it's sort of almost like an action shot in that respect. And yet we're just talking about the face. So these are like micro expressions in the face.
Right.
But it's so much more of an interesting portrait than anything I could have sort of willingly posed. So it's just an interesting thing, and really all it was a conversation. But listening to you talk about continuous light, I now think, well, this would have been even better, I think, with continuous light, because then you wouldn't be aware of the fact, or the subject wouldn't be aware of the fact that you're taking pictures, because you can't tell.
Mm-hmm.
With flashes, of course, the flashes are firing, so you always know. Maybe I should try that. Yeah. See, this is what I love about talking to people on this show. Virtually every time, there's something that makes me think, oh, maybe I should try that. That's really cool.
One of my professors back in college, who, have you seen the movie Whiplash? Which is, it's really it's a big exaggeration of how jazz professors are, although some of them are sort of like on that spectrum of horror. And this guy was kind of one of those, but he would always say, there is no there. And this is to circle back to what we talked about learning music and the way that you, as a musician, you understand early on 2 things. One, I have to work my butt off to be good at this. Like, there's no shortcut. There isn't a shortcut. It's going to take a ton of time and a ton of dedication. And 2, there is no there. In other words, you're never going to wake up one day and you're going to be like, oh, I made it. I'm the best photographer.
Yeah, right? That's it. I've done it now.
Like, exactly. Yeah. So, and the best photographers out there, if you talk to them, the first thing they'll tell you is how much they have to learn. I went to see Christian McBride at, I think it was at the Jazz Standard years ago when that was still a thing. And after the show, and Christian McBride is like one of the best jazz and everything bass players. He plays every style. He's an amazing bass player. Just like ungodly amazing. Like, it's just, you can't even imagine how this guy plays, right? So I went up to him after the show and I was like, I really enjoyed your playing. Thank you so much. And He's like, oh, I got to work on my bowed bass solos. That's what he said to me. And so it was just a reminder to me that the only way you become one of those people who are the best is by always working at your craft and knowing that there's always something to learn. And the people who don't have that just never get good. You're just not going to get good at it. Like if you think you're good and you think you're great at it, you're never going to feel the need to practice and get better. So I think the healthy way for us as artists and photographers and whatever kind of art we're into is to be sort of know you're great at it and also know you suck at it at the same time. So it's kind of like this pendulum that goes back and forth, and we're somewhere in that spectrum of viewing ourselves. And because you don't also want to be depressed all the time and be like, I suck at this, because that's not fun for anyone. And if you do grow and when you start to grow and make these inroads and your work is getting better, you definitely want to celebrate those wins, and you want to have confidence and know you're good at it. But you always want to remain having that, what I call a teachable spirit, because if you don't have that, you're gonna get to a certain level and then you'll never learn. And so I do a lot of coaching as well of other photographers, and sometimes people will call me or do a consult with me or want to learn from me. And within 20 seconds of talking to people, sometimes they don't actually want to learn something, because if you do critique their work or tell them, well, maybe you should this, that, or the other thing. Oh, well, I did that because of this, or, oh, well, but the reason why I did it like that is because, like, they just make excuses and it just doesn't even go, like, they just don't want to learn. So if that's for me, that's the worst place to be. I rather be not that good, but have that, teachable way about me, because then I know I will get better. But that's sort of how I look at it in a nutshell, as far as what we do, as far as growth is concerned. Because if you're not growing in your craft and in your art, like, you're shrinking. It's just like your business. If your business isn't growing, that's a bad thing. It's not good.
Yeah, I mean, and that's where we sort of come back to something you mentioned early on in the conversation, which is test shoots. It's a perfect way to to work on your craft and try out things, and it's almost like non-destructive editing. You can do a test shoot, and if it doesn't work out, well, nobody died. It's all good.
Right.
And
That's where I've learned the most personally, is in test
absolutely.
shoots.
Yeah.
I've learned the most. But what I do is I call it a strategic test shoot, because you just don't want to invite any old person in there. Like, you can, but what I started when I was early on in my career building my studio, I just knew the people I wanted to work with. And so once I had photographed all my family and friends, because that's where we all start, like, you just make them go in front of your camera. And I started to want to photograph other people. And I felt like, okay, I'm decent enough at this that I can do something good. Then I started to reach out to musicians who I wanted to connect with, because they had a great look, number one. Number two, they were in the network of other musicians that I wanted to work with. And number three, they had a big social presence. So I think when we do test shoots, we should be strategic. Like, if you want to work with a certain kind of client, then you want to do a test shoot with someone who's in that industry or in that world or in that space, because then you're going to connect with that. And then I always have guidelines for my test shoots. So it's always, X number of images included, and then you can purchase extras if you want, because you want them to remember, like, this is a value thing. Like, you're getting something of value from me. It benefits both of us. And then I always tell them, and then, you write me a Google review, share them on socials, all that kind of stuff. But some of my best paying clients have come from doing a test shoot with someone in the same space. And not only that, but everything I've learned in all the test shoots, I've brought into my paying clients. So I think it's a win-win if you do it strategically.
Absolutely. Test shoots are so super important. I mean, even, I do test shoots still with, like, a rubber head, just to figure out certain things, or to experiment with different things. And I try out some idea, so this is like, I think, like most creative people, you think about your creative pursuit at all times, not only when you're doing it. It might
Yes.
just be you're under the shower or you're walking the dog or whatever, and you go, oh, I wonder what happened if I did this. And then
Yeah.
of course you got to try it out. Just like as a musician, you're I don't know, you're sitting on a bus and you go like, oh, I've just had this great idea, and you just can't wait to get your hands on the guitar, to try that out.
Yeah.
And then it's really a matter of, well, 9 times out of 10, maybe it is a good idea, but every so often it's a dud, and you go, okay, well, I've learned something that definitely doesn't work the way I thought it would.
Kirsten, do you also do self-portraits?
I do. Yes, I do a lot of self-portraits. Absolutely, because so again, it's very identical to what you said earlier. I've exhausted the goodwill of my surrounding family when it comes to posing for me.
Oh, man.
I mean, it's so funny because my wife, my oldest daughter, my youngest daughter, they're now at the point when I really need them to just sit for me for, a few minutes or something because I want to try something. I don't know, it might be a new modifier or whatever the heck it is, right? They literally sit there now with their phones, and I just go look up, they pose, click, and then they're straight back into the phone. And they're all doing it. It's like, oh man. But yeah, self-portraits are super important, I think, because I mean, I think for two reasons. One is, of course, you can try out lots of different things. But the other thing is it puts you into the position of the person that you're photographing, your subject. And actually it allows you to see that scenario from a different angle and a different perspective. And I think that's actually important because it helps you to understand what the person must feel like, sitting on that chair, for example. So yeah, self-portraits. I also think they're fun. That's the other thing.
Yeah, me too. And I think I agree with you 100%. Self-portraits are one of the best ways to grow in your understanding of lighting, and to try new things, of course. And also, if you can take your own picture and make yourself look really good, that's hard to do because now you're not behind the camera. And so you're mirroring everything. And then you're using an app on a phone to take the picture or whatever, or using an interval timer in the camera. So it definitely develops your skills. So I like to do at least once a month. I'll try and if I have time, do a self-portrait and work and try different lighting and try different posing and all that sort of stuff. And it definitely does let you understand what your clients are feeling. Because especially if you're using continuous lights, like if you're using a triangle light of continuous lights, for example, if you've ever gone behind those lights, you'll know right away that it's not fun being back there long term because they are bright. So a lot of these things you're not going to know unless you just do it yourself, and that it helps you to empathize for sure with your clients.
Yeah, and in the very beginning, if you're just starting out with studio lighting, it's really just a matter of getting warm bodies in front of the lens. That's it. It doesn't really matter who they are. If they're still breathing, I'll shoot them.
That should be your tagline for your company.
Yeah,
if you're
maybe
breathing, I'll shoot you.
Maybe the next. That's actually, I remember that for the next networking meeting that I'm at.
Oh man,
that'd be my tagline. Yeah. If you breathe, I'll shoot you.
Funny, man. But it's true, man. I remember when I first started, Thanksgiving, I literally made my entire family. I set up a little lighting bay in the basement, and one by one, I dragged them all down there, kicking and screaming, like 20 people, and took all of their headshots. Just every face is a learning experience. It's the more faces, the better. And if you've never photographed a person, like if you're listening to this and you're like, oh, I'm terrified of photographing people. We all were before we took a photo of that first person who's not like a family member. Like the first time I thought to myself, I'm going to take a portrait of a stranger or of someone who's not like close to me. It was a very frightening prospect, but that's how you do it. You got to, there's always a first time for everything. And then you'd be surprised if you keep up with it, how quickly you can learn.
Yeah, and also the pressure, the first time somebody offers you money for it and you go, oh, dang it. Now I really can screw up because, now it actually matters. There's also something interesting, and I can't remember exactly what it's called. I think it's called the Kruger effect or something like that, where, especially when you're starting out, you just don't know what you don't know yet. And so
Mhm.
your perception of where your level of knowledge is completely skewed, because you just have, you have no real understanding of, of how big that world is that you've just had a glimpse into.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, they just are, they want to have everything perfect before they start. And that is just, there is no way that will ever happen in life, in anything. So if you want to start a business, if you want to become a photographer, if you want to learn any task or any skill, especially a creative task, you just have to jump in there and do it. It's the you just don't want to, perfection really is the enemy of progress, as people say all the time. And as long as you're getting better and you're learning from your past mistakes, like if you're not learning, if you make a mistake and you don't learn from it, however, that's not good. But as long as you're doing your best and growing and trending in the right direction, that's a huge win. That's what we all have to do. And I know a lot of people who want to be portrait photographers, but they just will endlessly try and learn this and try and learn that and buy this gear and try that gear and do this and do that. And you just come to the point where you just have to take what you have and just use it and put someone in front of your camera and just do your best and learn from it and then do better the next time. So that whole thing will atrophy you if you want to have everything perfect from the get-go. And like you said before about you don't know what you don't know, the only way you're going to learn is by doing it. So you have to gain that experience. Experience really is everything. This is why when I decided I wanted to be in photography really full time, I decided the first thing I said to myself is I will not go back to school. And I value education, and I'm very glad I did what I did with my education. But for me, it just became a matter of, okay, if I want to learn how to do this, I just need to find someone who does it and mentor with them. And I feel like that's the best way to learn. And the fastest, because when you're trying to build a business and you have a family to feed, you don't have 4 years more of your life to spend in college, especially after I spent so many myself. So I find that mentorship will fast track you too. And that's sort of the way that I did it,
Absolutely, it is. That's the thing. It's learning by doing, and also the old saying of done is better than perfect. That's the
Yeah.
Sometimes you just have to get it done and reevaluate, and then figure out what went wrong and what went well, and then proceed along those lines. As far as gear is concerned, the way I think is very simplistic. It's actually I won't upgrade something unless it breaks. Usually through overuse or I hit the limitations of that particular thing. And then that, to me, then it's a justifiable reason to upgrade something, whether that's the softboxes I shoot now. I've shot for, I don't know, 15 years. They're old, they're tattered. They they're not fancy, brand new pro photo, modifiers. They certainly don't look fancy in a video. But heck, I've shown, I've shot them for so long. I know them inside out, and that works for me. But yeah, it's this, it's this thing of like taking inspiration, taking advice, and being humble enough to accept that advice as well. That's the other thing.
Yeah.
That's the
As
the
long
only
as
way to
it's
progress.
coming from a good place, as long as it's coming from someone who knows what they're saying and is giving you advice or criticism to help you grow, and not from a bad place. That's my only criteria for criticism. I love criticism, but you better also have a body of work to back it up. And as long as it's coming from a place from someone who wants to help me grow, that's the only thing that I put caveats on it.
Absolutely, like the phenomenal guests on this podcast, of course. If you're listening, Pete, before we part, what would be your number one tip for anybody who's thinking of getting into shooting portraits or headshots in 2025?
Okay, The number one tip I would say is just shoot as many people as you possibly can with whatever you already have. So don't go buying gear. Don't do any of that. Take as many photos of as many people as you can with whatever phone, whatever camera. I almost said phone, whatever camera. At least have a camera. Don't use your iPhone. But that would be my number one tip, because you'll learn so much more about faces just by photographing them. And definitely when it comes to gear, I mean, I like good gear is good, but the more expensive gear becomes more important the more you know. So just shoot with what you have, find people to photograph, and do it because you love it.
Fantastic. Pete, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Hopefully not the last time. Great conversation. Thank you so much for being the guest on the Camera Shake podcast this week.
Thanks, Kirsten.
All right, that's a wrap for this episode, folks. Huge thanks to Pete Coco for sharing his lighting philosophy and walking us through what makes a great headshot truly shine. If this episode lit a spark for you, make sure to check out Pete's work. Links are, as always, in the show notes, in the description, and no matter whether you're listening on audio or watching this on YouTube. Now, that being said, make sure you tune back in every Thursday, as always. Make sure you're, put that in your diaries, calendars, whatever you kids use these days. And with that, keep shooting, stay creative, and we'll see you next Thursday.